three words: freedom, decency, and democracy. Welcome, everyone. I'm Patty Toth, she, her. I also identify as me, and I want to do a little sign language. You and me create muy. And our presenter this morning is our minister, Reverend Mary Martin. She will speak on a topic that is very important to us as Unitarian Universalists, democracy, which is close to my heart as the founder of Indivisible here in New Bern. Persist in faith. We face a challenge to democracy, a challenge that calls us to hope in moments of despair, a challenge that asks us to persist in the faith that we can and must make a difference. May our flaming chalice recommit us to truth in our words and our actions, that we may live as we believe people should live.
I was 17 years old the first time I felt a true passion for democracy. I was a college freshman sitting in my required Poli-Sci 101 class with Professor Colbert. No, not Colbert, although it is spelled the same. Mr. Colbert was a tall, rotund man with gray hair and a beard. He looked more like a mall Santa than a political science teacher. He told us on our very first day of class about the checks and balances in government by comparing them to the arcade game Pac-Man. He wanted us to understand the temporary power shifts and interdependence were set up to prevent any single force from dominating. Mr. Colbert couldn't have known that my brother was a computer scientist in the Navy who kept me supplied with hand-me-down video games and computers since I was too young to truly appreciate them. I may not have been very good at Pac-Man. I was more of an Oregon Trail girl myself, but Mr. Colbert was speaking my language. I remember being enamored with the way he spoke, and by the end of the semester, I would add political science as my second major to my sociology bachelor's degree. A few months later, I stood in line behind my very conservative father outside of an elementary school gym, waiting for the polls to open. I remember it being very cold and feeling the tension of my father's tall shoulders towering over me as he leaned back and noticed the UNA on my registration card. Later, as we rode to breakfast, I could tell he wanted to ask me who I voted for, but he never did. He told me that my vote was private and sacred, which is a word I don't remember him ever using before or since. I think he secretly didn't want to be disappointed because he already knew the answer. The late Senator Robert F. Kennedy said, "Democracy is messy. Democracy is hard. It's never easy." Over the last year, we've watched democracy in our country erode as our very own Pac-Man found the cheat codes in each level to find more ways to eat up the power. It's easy to feel panicked and perhaps triggered that the same may be happening in our state, in our city, in our neighborhoods, in our church. This past week, our fellowship had a called board meeting so that members of this congregation could share their thoughts and ideas. Some of you may be surprised to learn that I was the first to request that meeting. I don't outright take credit for many things. I do get blamed for a lot of things, often things I don't even know about or had nothing to do with, but this one I'll take credit for, and maybe blame. Was the meeting productive? Perhaps, yeah. Tom has lots of new responsibilities now because of it. I'm just kidding. No, he doesn't. The board will be working through the comments and publishing a response, and I think it will truly help us all understand what's happening in our fellowship and why. I think it helped people feel heard. Was it easy? No. It was messy and it was hard. It was painful. To be misunderstood as deeply as some people do is heartbreaking, and in weak moments, it makes me wonder if I'm cut out for this role at all. And maybe I'm not. But I deeply believe in democracy as a spiritual practice because the word democracy means nothing if we only talk about it. It only works in practice. And it won't be perfect. Just like the first time you sat down to play an instrument, you weren't an expert at it. It seems counterintuitive to say this, but our culture is not one that inherently teaches us to value democracy. Culturally, Americans elevate this idea of individualism. Democracy calls us to interdependence. Americans can be pretty arrogant. Democracy calls us to humility, to sacrifice and compromise. Americans can be greedy. Democracy calls us to generosity. Yes, democracy is a spiritual practice. It's spiritual because it calls us out of ourselves and into the recognition of something greater than ourselves, into the recognition of our interdependence. Democracy exists in the strange tension between allowing each person to feel heard and reminding us that it is not about the individual. It's about what's best for a group. Democracy is not I, it's we. Perhaps it's muy. How we go about that we is different today, perhaps, than how it was done in 1999, when our church ancestors first began to form this UUFMB organization. When there were 5, 8, 10, 35 people in the room, democracy looks different than when there are 100. There are 78 of you today. 79. We now have a board elected once a year by a full congregational membership vote, democratic process. A representative democracy on a small scale of people elected by you, comprised of committee chairs whose contact information is on the back of the bulletin you receive every week. Many of you have served on the board. Raise your hand if you've ever served on the board here. So you know how rewarding and difficult that job is. Democracy is demanding. People who govern themselves have a responsibility to understand themselves, their own bylaws, to understand what it is they're participating in. If you haven't read our bylaws, they are available to you. There's about 5 copies in the lobby. Stephanie has some QR codes, and there are QR codes scattered around the room too. There's one on that podium, there's one in the foyer, and there's one over there beside the crop walk table. Surprisingly, they aren't overly cumbersome to read or understand, and I'm not an attorney. Democracy is a practice that we cannot be good at unless we do it. And we can't do democracy if we don't know who we are. Without getting too far into the weeds, our board consists of 9 voting members of the congregation, 4 officers, president, Mr. President, vice president, she's back there somewhere, secretary, I don't see her, treasurer, and then there are 5 at-large trustees and the VP that serve as committee chairpersons or on standing committees of our fellowship, with the exception of the nominating committee. This is part of what you vote on every year, and it's outlined in our bylaws. You also vote on the budget. It can be very business-oriented and even cold. But it is more than that. It is something deeper. It's something broader, because it asks that we do this work not with only our own interests in mind, but with the interests of the group. This fellowship is a member of the Unitarian Universalist Association. This means that 25 years ago, a group of people got together, some of whom you know, and they covenanted to uphold the values of Unitarian Universalism. That's our primary responsibility to the UUA. Our values exist in Article 2 of the UUA bylaws. At the time, they were in the form of 7 principles or tenets. In 2024, the summer of last year, those principles were incorporated into the language we now have as our shared values. We spent 7 months studying them together over the last year. You already know the bulk of Article 2's bylaws from the UUA. Those values are transformation, equity, pluralism, justice, generosity, interdependence, and love. See, I even came up with signs for you. You can do this. I believe in you. We don't automatically live into these values. We have to be intentional about them, to create covenants around them, to make the time to learn them, and to intentionally practice them. I would argue that the blessing and the burden of democracy is that it requires a lot of us. We cannot defend our own democratic processes if we don't know what those processes are. Spiritual practices aren't easy, are they, Molly? They call us to something higher than ourselves, to a greater good. Democracy calls us to a greater good. It asks us to be humble enough to seek what's best for the group, sometimes over our own individual concerns. And it calls us into deep, authentic relationship with one another, because we must love one another and know one another enough to be honest without being cruel, and to be resilient when we disagree. Democracy requires investment in relationship because it's hard. And often in our individualist nature, it's easier to walk away than it is to continue the conversations. It's exhausting. It's heartbreaking. And it's worth it. The spiritual practice of democracy calls us to the freedom to have our own opinions and to the responsibility that our actions should benefit us all. One of my favorite parts about being your minister is that I don't have to tell you what to think. I only need to encourage you to think. So think. Democracy asks, am I listening deeply to those in this room, or am I only waiting for my turn to speak? Democracy asks, are we leaving room for all? She asks, what are the motives? Is this about me, or is it about we? She asks, are we in line with our values? Just like dancing, or ukulele, piano, or video games, we will only do democracy well by practicing it. And I commit to continue to practice it with you.
Democracy Benediction by Lucas Hergert. We are democracy, unruly, unfinished, unrelenting people of rebellious joy taking to the streets. Underground resilience, resisting compliance, the pleasure of activism organizing into simple hope. We are democracy. People of principles taking on principalities, witnessing the worth of those called unworthy. Justice just now gaining ground. Integrity of interdependence, existence extending. Living democracy in heads, hands, hearts. We know that democracy can die. Osophy, brittle byproducts of bygone idealists. Plotting politicians pirating votes. corporations cannibalizing our care for the world. Look, it can wither, distend, come to an end. Democracy, today we will love you alive. Make you ours, make you thrive, and vote as though our hope is on the line. Shalom. Shalom. Salam. Salam. Ashe. Ashe. Namaste. Namaste. Peace for all.